Alex Pereira saves another UFC main event as Conor McGregor is injured and has pulled out of his UFC 303 main event with Michael Chandler. Today, we're going to talk about the new fights on the card and what this means for Conor versus Chandler going forward. So stick around to hear all of the news about UFC 303. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. So we are going to start with the official announcement that just came from Dana White a few hours ago that UFC 303 main event Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler is off.
Here I am again. Conor McGregor is out of 303 versus Michael Chandler with an injury. The new main event is Alex Pereira. He is facing former UFC light heavyweight champion Jiri Prochazka. The co-main event will be number 3 ranked Brian Ortega taking on rising superstar Diego Lopez. Jamal Hill is out with a knee injury, so Carlos Ulberg will now be taking on Anthony Smith. I'll see you guys in Vegas.
So there you have it, all of the new fights for UFC 303. We're going to get to those in a minute, but first we need to talk about Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Most of the news regarding the change in the UFC 303 main event and skepticism about whether or not McGregor versus Chandler was actually going to happen came from Ariel Helwani. Now, many people, including myself, thought that he was yapping and baiting for engagement, but it turns out that he was right. And here was a few of the things that he had to say about the skepticism leading towards the UFC 303 main event before the change was actually announced.
We are Wednesday, 113. The positivity that I talked about exactly 1 week ago today is nowhere to be found. I would say this fight is very much in limbo. I would say that it's hanging on, and I would say the UFC is working very, very hard right now to figure out a plan B.
So Ariel said things like that. He also said on Twitter that UFC is not intentionally trying to drag out this UFC 303 saga. They are burning the midnight oil, trying to find a replacement solution. The issue is there aren't a ton of available options right now. If there was, they would have announced it all already and moved on. Again, many people were very skeptical that Ariel was baiting for clicks. As it turns out, he was correct. Here's what Ariel had to say earlier today after the Khamzat versus Rob Whittaker main event was replaced with Rob Whittaker versus Ikram Aliskerov. The video that I just posted a few minutes ago discusses that. I'll link that in the description down below. It is a big day for combat sports today. Big UFC day. Not in a good way, but big day for UFC news. Ariel Helwani said on Twitter, he said, now that the Saudi main event situation has been resolved, all of the focus is on 303. They have a new main event lined up that doesn't include McGregor and Chandler. They have a new co-main lined up that doesn't include Hill and Ulberg. The consensus seems that they want to announce it all, plus the new date for McGregor Chandler. August or September has been discussed. That would most likely mean creating a new pay-per-view date for those months. Either 8/31 or 9/28 have been discussed. That part, which is massive in all of this, has not been finalized. Hence the delay, lots of moving parts. No talk, by the way, has centered around Chandler fighting someone else on 303. That was once discussed at the very beginning of all of this, but nothing made sense. The plan, at least as of right now, seems to be just to move it to later this year. And as you can see right here, Ariel Helwani was obviously right with all of the things that he said, and he did go on a little bit of a victory lap. So here's what he said is Conor McGregor versus Chandler at UFC 303 has been canceled per Dana White. The new main event is Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka for the light heavyweight title. McGregor versus Chandler will be rebooked later this year. The fight has been pushed because McGregor suffered an injury before last week's scheduled press conference that got canceled. Everyone involved, UFC McGregor paradigm, did everything in their power to save this. It didn't look good initially, then it didn't, then it did, and finally it didn't. The plug was officially pulled less than 48 hours ago. There weren't a ton of options. Pereira Prochazka was always the top choice. Feelers were sent last week, but there were many hurdles. Mainly, Pereira is in Australia on a seminar tour and is getting over multiple broken toes, but he stepped up. Again, Prochazka was in right away. so it's set. Now, Ariel did go on his victory tour. As you can see, he said, all right, now single file line right over here for everyone to apologize. Hurry up, I ain't got all night, jabronis. He also reposted saying, I feel like you're making things up. You're literally making shit up for engagement. Quit being the weasel that you are, or you have a bad source telling you things. And then he posted this, saying to Ariel Helwani, from Reason for Behavior, Dana White convinced me that he was a liar. I was jealous that he has real sources. My favorite MMA YouTuber told me he was wrong. Michael Chandler's motivational tweets gave me optimism. I started watching MMA during the pandemic. Ariel has a life and I don't. I am very sorry and will no longer doubt the excellence of Ariel. And then live look at Helwani accepting apologies tonight. So as you can see, Helwani on his victory lap tour tonight, because his sources did not lead him astray this time. He was very on point with the predictions that he was making. He must have had a good source. At this point, his source might be McGregor or Chandler. I mean, genuinely, it could be one of the two fighters involved in the fight. There are some more details involving McGregor versus Chandler being canceled and Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka being scheduled. Here is a little bit deeper analysis from Ariel Helwani.
All right, I'm walking outside, but I want to provide a little more context to today's breaking news. So as you just heard, the Conor McGregor-Michael Chandler fight scheduled for June 29th is off. It has been canceled. Conor McGregor suffered an injury about a day or so before that scheduled press conference in Dublin. That was early last week. And so that's why there wasn't a press conference. Now, the reason why they didn't want that to come out was because there was hope that the fight would still be on and that it would be all good and salvaged. And so you obviously don't want your opponent to know that you are hurt. Understandable. And so initially there was obviously some anxiety over the injury. Then there was optimism, as I've reported all along. And they started to re-promote it, and Michael Chandler did an interview about it and all this stuff. But then at the beginning of this week, the pessimism started to creep in. And about 48 hours or so ago, the realization was that this fight isn't going to happen. And so the UFC went into overdrive, and this was led by Hunter Campbell, who's become quite known now in the MMA community due to that UFC Fight Inc. docuseries on Roku. And they reached out to a bunch of people. The main one being, there aren't a ton of options right now, just given the schedule, given who has fought, given who is scheduled to fight. And the top choice seemed to be, from the beginning, Jiri Prochazka against Alex Pereira for the light heavyweight title rematch. There were some other feelers sent out to the likes of Max Holloway. There was some talk of a replacement for McGregor. Not a lot of options as far as a brand new fight is concerned. And finally, about around 24 hours ago, they really started to zero in on Prochazka and Pereira. Prochazka was in from the start. When he did that interview at the Octagon show, he was not referring to this. He was referring to perhaps the Perth card later this summer. Alex Pereira was the big hurdle, mainly because he's in Australia doing a seminar tour, taking some time off, but has continued to train, I'm told. He also had those two broken toes. One suffered before 300, one suffered during his win over Jamal Hill at UFC 300. But the man is stepping up again. Less than 10 fights in the UFC, and he's doing another incredible thing. The two MSG fights, 300, now stepping up. Obviously the other big fights as well. Double champion, all that stuff. And so nothing was ever going to compare to a McGregor fight. Nothing will compare. Nothing can compare. But the UFC pulls another rabbit out of their hat, and they get it done. Pereira Prochazka 2 is on. New main.
So there's a ton of great information in that video. And I know that there is a lot of Helwani hate that goes around in the MMA community, but he was the one reporting on this. He ended up being right. I'll give credit where credit is due. He was on the ball here, regardless of many people thinking that fighters feed him bad information, despite many people just disliking him as a journalist or a person. I got to be objective. I have to call it as I see it. He was on the ball here. And a lot of people, including myself, I'll admit it, I thought he was completely yapping for engagement, just trying to get clicks, and that Pereira, and you know what? I thought Conor versus Chandler was going to go forward as scheduled. I genuinely did. And I thought that maybe Dana was intentionally feeding Ariel bad information through somebody to be petty. But I was wrong. I'll admit it. I'm not too proud to admit when I was wrong about something. So Ariel was on the ball about that. And one thing that he did mention that I wanted to talk about is how Pereira saved another event. He saved 300 on 6 weeks notice. He saved 303 on, I think it's 16 days notice. This man, Alex Pereira, is getting paid lately. I mean, honestly, getting paid since he's fought Izzy for the first time, but he's headlined Madison Square Garden twice. He headlined UFC 300, and now he is filling in for Conor McGregor. There's refunds and stuff involved, but because the main event changed, but in what's supposed to be the biggest gate in UFC history. And listen, like, these guys are both getting paid, but I'm telling you, Alex Pereira is getting a bag for this, because let me show you. Alex Pereira for UFC 300 allegedly made $2.85 million. And it could have been more. You got pay-per-view points on the back end, things like that. This man, Alex, and this was on 6 weeks notice. Just think about what he's getting paid for 303 on 16 days notice with broken toes and having to make weight and being in Australia. And just considering how desperate the UFC was, I'm telling you, Alex Pereira, he got probably a check that would make me sick to my stomach to replace this fight. And hey, Alex Pereira is my favorite fighter, I'll say it. And so I'm happy for him. Good on him, saving the company. Talk about a company man stepping up. Not to glaze too much, but I think that, just take a second and appreciate Alex Pereira, because we're no longer in the era of active champions anymore, in my opinion, where we had Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya, and Alex Volkanovski defending their belt. It seemed like 3 times a year. Now we got Leon that sits out for 7-8 months at a time. You got John Jones is going to be out for 1.5 years by the time he actually fights. You got Ilia Topuria, who is one in February. Probably not going to see him till the end of the year. You got Islam Makhachev, who fights twice a year. You got, Alexandre Pantoja is relatively active, but we're not in the era of super active UFC champions right now. And so somebody like him, Alex Pereira, he defended at 295, which was in November. He fought at UFC 300 in April, and now he's fighting at UFC 303 in June. We've gotten Alex Pereira 3 times in the last 7 months. That's what I wanted to point out, as well as the activity. Look at this. Alex Pereira came into the UFC in November of 21, and we are in June of 24. Okay, Alex Pereira came into the UFC in November of 21, and we're in June of 24. So that's 2.5 years, and he has fought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This will be his 9th fight in 2.5 years. This will be Alex Pereira's 9th fight in 30 months. And not to mention, that includes as of late as well, since April of 2023. So in the last year and 2 months, once we reach UFC 303, this will be 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time UFC 303 comes around, this is going to be Alex Pereira's 5th fight since April of 2023. This will be his 5th fight in 14 months. I mean, that's just crazy. In this era where there's a lot of injuries, there's a lot of stars, champs get spaced out, the activity for Alex Pereira is absolutely insane. So shout out to him, giving the fans what he wants, what we want. Real company man. I mean, Alex Pereira went from relative obscurity, oh yeah, he's the guy that knocked out Israel Adesanya in kickboxing a long time ago, to literally one of the biggest stars in the sport in 2.5 years. He came into the UFC and he just completely stole all of Adesanya's thunder. Now Adesanya hasn't fought in almost a year, lost to Sean Strickland in embarrassing fashion. Alex Pereira came in and just stole all of Adesanya's thunder, stole all of his spotlight in 2.5 years. Kind of similar to how Adesanya stole his dog's innocence, if you know what I'm saying. In regards to refunds, in the state of Nevada for UFC 303, there is an opportunity for people to get refunds because there was a main event change. I don't know how many people are going to want to go through a refund process. This is still a banger card. And so we'll see what happens. But if I was here, I don't know. I'd try to get some money back because of how pricey this card was to go to for sure. But it is an amazing card. And we'll get to those new fights in a second. But first off is the talk of, are they going to rebook Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor? It could be at the Sphere in September. It could be a new pay-per-view on August 31st or September 28th. At this point, I just want to see Chandler get paid at this point. It's not even necessarily about Conor fighting. It's funny, but I also feel like it's so sad and dumb. The way that Chandler, it just looks like he completely made a mistake waiting out for this Conor fight, because now it's probably going to be about 3 years since his last fight by the time he competes. And it's going to be over 3 by the time Conor competes. If we're talking September of 2024, Conor got hurt in July of 2021. Guys, it has been a long time since we've seen these guys fight, but specifically it's been a long time since we've seen Conor McGregor, which kind of speaks to the star power that he has, that 3.5 years off, he can still draw the biggest gate in UFC history when he hasn't had the most success as of late either. But it definitely looks like Chandler has potentially made a huge error in his career by waiting for the Conor McGregor fight. Now we are going to take a look at the new main card, UFC 303, or just a quick little look at the new fights. It's still an elite pay-per-view, but I am so disappointed, and that just shows you that there's only one Conor McGregor. This is an elite pay-per-view that they have mostly put together the main card on very short notice, and I'm still disappointed a little bit. My excitement has died a little bit. So obviously in the main event, we have Pereira and Prochazka rematch for the light heavyweight title. It's going to be a fantastic fight. I think it'll be over quick, in my opinion, whichever way it goes. Both of these guys are cutting a lot of weight on short notice. This is going to, and their gas tanks are not going to be great. Whoever wins is going to win by KO early, I think. We move on from there to Brian Ortega and Diego Lopes at featherweight. Big jump up in the rankings for Diego Lopes. He beat Sadiq Youssef at UFC 300 to get into the rankings, but let's not forget that he actually fought Movsar Evloev on very short notice in his UFC debut. If Diego Lopes can get the jump on Brian Ortega, he's one win from a title shot. They'll do him against Movsar probably. If Volk gets a rematch or Holloway fights Topuria, Lopes versus Evloev rematch is definitely what they're going to do in the meantime to decide who fights Topuria, who fights Max, who fights Volk, stuff like that. So we'll see what happens there. But big fight with featherweight, huge featherweight implications with rising star Diego Lopes. We move on from there. We have Anthony Smith against Carlos Ulberg. Great fight. I wish it was still Ulberg and Jamal Hill, but it looks like we're going to see Anthony Smith get his head bopped around. It's going to be worse than the Khalil Roundtree finish for Anthony Smith. But hey, I guess Anthony Smith is that guy that fights prospects at 205. We move on from there. Mayra Bueno Silva against Macy Chiasson. Obviously, we don't care about that one. And then down from there on the main card, we have Ian Machado Gary and Michael Venom Page. Sorry, I should just say Ian Gary. We have Ian Gary and MVP. That's what we have. Correction, that's what we have. We have Ian the Cut Gary and Michael Venom Page, and fantastic fight on paper, but when it actually comes to the fight, I think it's going to be a low kick at range and circle around, boring decision type of fight. But the winner of this fight is going to get a #1 contenders fight, in my opinion. They're both big names. Down from there, we have Joe Pyfer, who is coming off of his loss against Jack Hermanson in a main event, looking to bounce back against Marc-Andre Barriault, who just fought Chris Curtis at UFC 297, I believe it was, and he's a good gatekeeper. If Joe Pyfer can get a win here, he's going to get another ranked opponent. It shouldn't be a main event, but I think Joe Pyfer is going to get it done here, and I think that he is going to move on to a ranked opponent, but lower rankings, like Anthony Hernandez or something like that. So there we have it. Conor's out. Chandler, somebody needs to check on him. Pereira and Prochazka is the new main event. Ortega Lopes is the new co-main event. Still a fantastic card. Guys, let me know your thoughts down below. Who wins in the new main event? Do we actually see Conor and Chandler fight, or is Conor's career done? Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you want access to extra content aside from my regular videos, click the link in the description down below to become a channel member and get access to members-only live streams and other bonus perks. Or click the join button on our channel homepage. And if you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, check out my weekly podcast, the Hissyfit podcast, and check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World. I'll have them both linked in the description down below. Go watch this suggested video, and I'll see you next time.